we start, did someone lose the glasses somewhere? I believe it's a date.
You can start it.
Okay.
Hello, everyone. I know it is very tough to keep awake after the lunch, especially after a presentation made by a scholar. So, actually, I received a call from Dr. Sun. He said because the CAPA allocate like 2 hours presentation time to him. So he asked for my help to kill some time for him. So as a presentation to kill in time, I will try my best this afternoon. Okay, so my name is Shenhou Zhang. I'm actually currently a PhD candidate in the University of Delaware. Today, the topic of my presentation is in the aftermath of the massive gas explosion in Kaohsiung. Okay, so this accident occurred in July 31st. So actually the next day, the first day of August, I was invited to give a presentation in the Central Police University in Taiwan. Of course, my presentation at that time was not about the explosion, but one of my audience asked me a question. She said, you are a disaster researcher and also a disaster responder. So would you please tell us the right way to respond to disasters? So actually in that time I answered to her, I say, I don't think that there is one single correct way to respond to any disaster. And also, even I was in Kaohsiung last night in that time, I don't think I could do anything better than the disaster responders. So before my presentation, I want to remind our audience, this presentation is not trying to find out a single individual or group to blame. Or this presentation is also not trying to find out the right answer to respond to this kind of disaster. Because I don't think there is a single answer to everything, okay? So before my presentation, I want to introduce myself. Okay. So I received my bachelor's degree in fire science from the Central Police University in Taiwan. So after 3 years of my graduation from the CPU, I studied abroad to the Arizona State University. And at my second year in Arizona, I did my internship in the Phoenix Fire Department. In that time, I helped them to develop some firefighting strategies and tactics, and also helped them to determine the new locations of the fire stations. So I went back to Taiwan after my graduation from the ASU and resumed my position as a fire officer in Taiwan, and I got promoted in year of 2008 as a fire battalion captain. So I came back to America to my PhD study. So now I currently a PhD candidate with disaster science and management. And I plan to graduate next year. So if any of you have any job opportunity, please contact me after the presentation. Okay. So for my practical experience, I was an emergency planner. So I planned the emergency response plan for the Kaohsiung tunnel. Kaohsiung tunnel is the longest tunnel in Taiwan, and also it is the 5th longest tunnel in the world. So in that time, I reviewed lots of disastrous cases in the world and tried to figure out the lessons learned. And also I wrote some chapters in the National Handbook of Firefighting Safety and Tactics. in Taiwan. I also taught some courses in the National Hazmat Training course from the National Fire Agency in Taiwan. As I said before, I was a fire captain before I left Taiwan, and then I was certified as an associate emergency manager in the United States last year. Okay, so this is my background. So this presentation will talk about the first, an overview of the explosion, and the second, I will introduce the Taiwanese Disaster Management Organization, and finally, I will give some suggestions for both central government and local government in Taiwan. So first, the overview. So, as I said before, this explosion occurred in the July 31st. Actually, it is at midnight of the July 31st. So, this disaster have occurred in Kaohsiung City, and Kaohsiung City is a very big industrial city in the southern part of Taiwan. So, because of the need of transporting the chemical materials and the gases, the Kaohsiung City has many pipes go underground the major roads. So you can see the diagram on your left-hand side. This diagram shows there are lots of pipes goes underground the major roads. So on the July 31st, one of the pipe, the propylene pipe, was leaking, and the high concentration of the pipeline gas leaked underground. So after 3 years of accumulation, the gas was ignited, then caused a very great explosion in Kaohsiung. So the leaking material is called the propylene, actually it's C3H6. So I have arranged some major characteristics of this chemical. So first, this chemical is heavier than the air. So once it leaks, it accumulates underground. And the second, this gas does not chemically bond to the water. So even firefighters apply water to the ground, they cannot flush away these chemical gases. And also, this gas is extremely flammable. So once it leaks, it is easier to be ignited. So it is very important to control the traffic, to stop the vehicles to enter the ground, because we're afraid the heat from the engines might possibly ignite the flammable gas. And also this gas is poisonous. So all disaster responders has to wear the breathing apparatus during their response to this disaster. Okay, so these are the major characteristics, and based on these characteristics, we think about these considerations before we respond to this disaster. So we can see this map shows the impacted area. So the area in red means the explosion area, which the major pipes goes through this area. And the area surrounded by the blue lines is a traffic control zone. So how big is the impacted area? Actually, the size of the impact area is equal to the Central Park in the New York City. So it is actually very big. So here are some quick facts of the explosion. So there are more than 30 people died in this explosion, including 6 firefighters, and more than 300 people injured during the disaster. And also more than 23,000 families impacted by this explosion. And the most important thing is we need to relocate more than 1,200 people. So think about, you have 1,200 people in the area of the Central Park in the New York City. We need to think about where and how to relocate these people. Actually, this is a very tough question because the impacted area is very large. So I will come back to this issue later on my later slides. So first of all, the response activities. So please look at the picture on the right-hand side. This detector is commonly used by the Taiwanese firefighters. So actually, this detector can only detect like the common gases, like the H2S, the oxygen, and the carbon monoxide. So actually, before the explosion, the Taiwanese firefighters didn't know what type of gas is leaking. Okay, so this is the first thing. So that's why they ask for the help from the National Hazmat Response Team, which is managed by the Environmental Protection Agency. So you can see the picture on your left-hand side. This is normal equipment they wear to the site. So you see they are taking the samples. So every time if they know there is a gas leak, they need to take the samples and compare the samples to the patterns on their laptops. So in average, they can compare about 10 types of patterns each time, but there are more than 1,000 patterns on their laptops. So this is similar to find a needle in a haystack. So it is very tough because the disaster responders didn't know what type of chemical was leaking in that time. So based on the discussion above, we understand actually to respond to this disaster, the firefighters have to cooperate with the Environment Protection Agency to figure out what type of chemical is leaking. And also they need to work with private companies to turn off the gas valves. So actually the firefighters has to work with people from other departments and organizations. So, and also on the response activities, we also have the problem of how and why not. So first, after the explosion, many Taiwanese people criticize why the firefighters apply the water mist to the ground. Okay, you can see the picture on your upper right. So actually, they apply the water mist because it is according to the standard operation procedure in both the United States and Taiwan. Because the water mist can cool down the temperature on the ground, and also the water mist can dilute the gas concentration in the air. So for me, I personally think this measure is not wrong. So I don't know why why many people criticize this kind of firefighting strategy. And also, some people say, why did not initiate the evacuation activities before the explosion? So actually, because the gas was like a spray out through the air, so it is very hard to figure out the range of the impacted area before the explosion. So because we don't know the range of the impacted area, so it is very hard to determine how many families, how many apartments we need to evacuate. So even in the impacted area, which I talk about close to the Central Park in New York City, there are more than 10,000 people need to be evacuated. So think about it. You have so many people that you need to evacuate them within 3 hours. How tough is it? So you can look at the picture at your right. So think about how to manage so many people. It actually is not easy. So to respond to these disasters, first, if you want to evacuate people, it is very important for the fire department to work with the police department, because only the police officers have the authority to order people leave their home. And also, even we want to evacuate more than 10,000 people, the firefighters still have to work with other personnel from different departments and even volunteers, because there are too many people living in the impacted area. So overall, all my discussion above, I just try to give you a concept. The firefighters alone cannot handle this kind of disaster. Firefighters alone cannot, can only provide a short-term measures. They cannot handle this. So disaster management actually needs the teamwork. It's not by a single organization. So even worse is that we know disaster management needs the cooperation between the different departments. But what makes things worse is that the Taiwanese disaster management law assign the different types of disasters to the different ministries. So for example, the Ministry of the Interior is in charge of the typhoon, earthquake, fire, and explosion. Okay, so the Ministry of the Economic Affairs is in charge of the flooding, droughts, public pipeline, electrical line, and also the mining disasters. And also the Environment Protection Agency in Taiwan is in charge of the hazmat, the chemical material disaster. So based on the Taiwanese disaster management law, we know this explosion is administrated by the 3 ministries in Taiwan. So this kind of situation causes a problem because after the explosion, no single organization has the overall authority to oversee or to respond to this explosion. And also because of the authority is distributed to different ministries, so everyone only focus on their parts. They don't have the overall big picture of the whole disaster management related discussions. So my first suggestion of this is I suggest the Taiwanese government has to establish a Taiwanese FEMA, which is a cabinet-level disaster management organization. So why? Because actually the disaster management includes the 4 phases. So the first is disaster mitigation, which includes to do the urban planning, set up the laws and the regulations. And also it includes the second phase is the disaster preparedness, which includes the education and making the evacuation plans. And also the disaster response. After disaster strikes, we need to respond to disasters. So which includes firefighting and also initiate the evacuation. So finally, we need to do the disaster recovery, which includes the participation of the social workers and also to rebuild the community. So actually, you look at these 4 phases. When we are doing the disaster mitigation, we are setting up the laws and the regulations of the disaster management. We need to think about how to make the evacuation plans. So it's connect to each other. So when we are making the evacuation plans, we need to think about how can we initiate the evacuation activities during disasters. So it's connect too. And when we are doing the evacuation, we need to think about how can we invite the social workers to the shelter to help us to modify the emotion of the victims, right? So when we are rebuild the community, okay, we need to think about the measures to mitigate the future disasters in a certain area. So actually, these 4 phases connect to each other. It's like a cycle. So each one connect to each other. So if we only focus on the disaster response, like the majority of the discussion in Taiwan after the explosion, they just talk about how can we better respond to the similar disaster in the future. We can never do the things right. Why? Because we only focus on a quarter of the whole disaster management. So we really need someone to take care of the whole phases of the disaster management. And this organization must have the authority to do all types of disaster management, right? So if you distribute this disaster, A disaster to A ministry, B disaster to B ministry, then nobody can talk to each other, right? So it is very important to set up a Taiwanese cabinet level disaster management organization. So actually, the miscommunication is not just between the governmental departments. It's also between the governments to the private sectors and even to the citizens. So actually, we created this disaster. So please look at the picture on your left-hand side. So why people can build their homes and business above the pipes? So is this a mistake by the local government, or by the constructor, or by the pipeline company, or even by the citizens themselves? So actually, disaster management, we cannot just simply find a single individual or organization to blame. Actually, disaster management problems are caused because of a very complex situations. So, can you hear me? Hello. If you cannot hear me, please raise your hand. You cannot hear me. Okay, you're ready. Okay. Okay, so this is the first question: why we build our buildings, our business above the pipes? Why? Because of everyone take the accountability. Because everyone didn't care about the disaster management, right? So also on your right hand side, please see the map. The fire spots means the explosion spots during this explosion. So you can see the second lane shows the purple. Sorry for the color. The purple shows these pipes are managed by the Changrong chemical engineering company. And then also the third map shows on the same area, there are two other companies own the pipes, go through the same roads. So actually the pipeline are operated by 3 different companies, but no one can control all of them. So that's what happened. Once they found something is leaking, they could not find someone to turn off the valve, right? So the things getting expand. So my suggestion number 2 is to enhance the vertical and the horizontal communications between the local and the central government, and between the parallel organizations in the local government level, which includes the local departments, the non-governmental organizations, the media, and the private company. So the picture on the lower right shows the lady in the middle is the mayor of the Kaohsiung city. So the gentleman seated next to her is the prime minister in Taiwan. And the person wearing the red suit is the incident commander, who is a fire officer. So, and all of them were surrounded by the media. So this picture shows actually disaster management requires a team. So everybody has to contribute to the disaster management. There is no one hero can handle any disaster. Right? So actually, after the accident, I observed lots of problems. The first is the response problem. We can see a picture on the right-hand side. It is a firefighter who got burned, and all of his fire garment was gone, right? So we need to consider about that. I understand after the explosion, many citizens expected the Taiwanese government to initiate the search and rescue activities as soon as possible, but we also need to think about the disaster responders are also the humans too. So they need food, they need water, and they need enough rest. So after the explosion, I didn't see any discussion about how to set up a system to rotate the disaster responders. to make sure they have enough food, enough water, and enough rest. So although time is very important, I think to make sure the disaster responders do their jobs in a very good condition in both mental and physical, it's very important too, right? So also for the media management, you can see the picture on the lower right, lower left, sorry. This female reporter stood on the ground without any helmet and the protection gear, right? So she was risking her life to give you the news. So actually it is very dangerous. And actually you can see the picture in the central. Actually there is a newspaper reporter from the April Daily got burned after the explosion. So in the future, when we do the disaster response or disaster management, it is very important to make sure no one can enter to the impacted area without wearing appropriate equipment. And no one can enter to the area, impacted area, without the permission of the incident commander. So this is very important too. And also, let's look at the victims. In disaster research, we tend not to say victims, so we say the impacted people. So they argue with that, they need more privacy on the shelter. And also they think the contemporary shelter is not comfortable enough. So they ask for better place. And also finally, they think the compensation, the distribution of compensation by the Kaohsiung government is too slow. So actually, we know the government has to initiate the investigation of the explosion and has to follow many procedures before they distribute the compensation. So I understand why the government is so slow to distribute the money. But the people, the impacted people, they did not know. They just criticize why we are so slow. So all of the discussion above lead to the conclusion here. Actually, disaster management is a science of handling with people. Okay, so we have to deal with all the problems generated from the humans, but not the phenomena generated by the disaster. For example, in order to dealing with the earthquake, when we respond to the earthquake, we need to save lives, but not to save the buildings, but not to save the collapsed building. So actually, disaster management is a science of the humans. We need to think about how can we provide better services to our citizens, but not to solve the circumstances generated by disaster. Okay. So my suggestion number 3, I would suggest to set up a petrochemical area and move away all the pipelines under the major roads in Taiwan. So actually many policymakers in Taiwan had suggested the same thing, but this suggestion is rejected by the local council member because they think if you want to move away from the pipelines, you need to earn the permission of the local citizens, especially for those citizens living next to the future petrochemical park, right? So this picture shows they say we need to initiate a referendum before we decide where to move to set up the new petrochemical park. So again, disaster management is a science of handling humans. So disaster management problems connect to the social problems, and the social problems connect to the political problems. So everything is connected together. So remember, disaster management is not to manage disasters, it's to manage human behaviors. So everything connects together. So disaster problems are political problems too. So finally, I conclude my presentation in this picture. Okay, so I suggest we need to think about the disaster management from a broad picture. So what is broad picture? Is from the whole nation first. We need to think about the strategy first, and then decide on the tactics later. So for example, if we stand on the whole nation perspective, then we can easily think about the central government might need to set up a particular organization to manage disasters. So this is my suggestion number one. So we need to look at the whole society first and think about the central government. Okay, so go to the next level. If we stand on the central government level, then we can figure out what local government needs. So if we stand on the central government, we can easily figure out actually the local government needs to enhance their vertical and horizontal communications with different groups. And also in order to prevent the future explosion in the same place, the local government has to try to move out all the pipelines, right? So if we can easily set up the disaster management policies from the big to small. But if you go to the different directions, for example, from the tactics to strategy, or from a single organization to the whole society, you are easily overemphasize the rule of a particular organization. For example, after the explosion, many discussions are centered on the rules of fire departments. So actually, this is go to a different direction. If you overemphasize the rule of the fire department, then you will set up a very big fire department in the central government, which I think is not correct, because disaster management emphasizes on the cooperation between the different departments, but not to promote a single organization to oversee and to manage everything, especially the department is just a part of the disaster response phrase. Okay, so I think this is my presentation today, and my email is on the slide. So welcome to email me and talk to me if you need further information. Thank you very much.
We're going to take a break, all right? So